Get him away from the door. He's a drug risk. Her voice sliced through the hallway just as the emergency alarms kicked into a higher pitch. The monitors inside the C-section room flickered, and someone shouted for more hands, but the woman blocking the entrance didn't budge. The senior nurse hesitated, torn between protocol and panic, yet she still held her ground. Then the man she'd accused didn't shout, didn't argue. He just stared through the glass as the vitals began to drop. Everything would flip the moment the team realized who they were keeping out. And before I show you the exact second when the storm knocked out the OR equipment and turned the surgery into chaos. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. This isn't really a story about hospital rules. It's about what a father becomes when the door closes on his family. He stood there in the uniform no one ever noticed, the kind meant for basements and service tunnels, not the bright wing of maternity emergencies. Daniel had already rushed 4 floors upward with a crate of blood units when the call for his wife came echoing through the radio. He should have been let in immediately. Instead, he was shoved back like danger. The alarms kept pulsing overhead, bleeding into each other, vibrating against the glass. A storm hammered the windows at the far end of the corridor, and the lights quivered in the same rhythm. He breathed slowly, steadying himself, even as fear tightened in his chest. Somewhere inside that room, Elena was losing blood. Somewhere inside, their child was fighting for a heartbeat. For a moment, he kept one hand against the wall, feeling the rumble of the backup generators. Years ago, in a different kind of crisis, that vibration meant the difference between saving a life or watching it slip. He didn't talk about those years. People at the hospital only knew him as a night courier, the quiet one who never complained about overtime. But calm didn't mean unaffected. He swallowed the fear building in his throat. He needed to keep his head clear. Panic fogged judgment, and judgment was what would keep Elena alive. The woman blocking him, Meredith, didn't care about any of that. She clutched her clipboard like armor, stepping even farther between him and the access door. Her eyes swept his stained uniform, landing on the iodine splashes that looked nothing like what she assumed. She didn't ask questions, didn't verify his name, didn't check the file. She simply declared him a threat and expected everyone to agree. A young OB resident lingered behind her, shifting nervously, catching Daniel's gaze for just a second before looking away. She knew something was wrong. She knew spouses weren't handled like this. But Meredith's title carried more weight than her training. Daniel kept his voice low when he spoke again. "My wife is in there." No one responded. The hallway swallowed the words. A monitor beeped sharply on the other side of the glass, and several staff rushed across the room, their movements tight, urgent. He recognized the formation instantly, the clustering, the way they angled their bodies, the hand gestures. Something was going wrong. Very wrong. The storm outside growled then, as if echoing the rising tension. The lights flickered harder, dimming just long enough for a nurse to gasp. Backup power kicked in with a metallic clank, reverberating beneath their feet. Daniel straightened. A power drop at the wrong moment during a C-section wasn't an inconvenience. It was a threat. He exhaled slowly through his nose, forcing a steadiness he didn't feel. His mind sifted through probabilities the way it once had in field hospitals where seconds dictated survival. Hemorrhage risk, equipment failure, staff shortage, vulnerable patient, vulnerable infant. Everything inside him insisted he move, but every step forward earned another wall of security. The young resident finally tried to speak. "He's family. He needs to be..." Meredith shut it down with a raised hand. "He's contaminated and unstable. I'm not letting him anywhere near an active OR." Another sharp alarm rang from inside. A tray hit the floor. Someone shouted for suction and pressure. Daniel's fingers curled reflexively, nails pressing into his palms. The world around him blurred into a tunnel, pointed directly at the room holding his entire life. He wasn't supposed to be here like this. Locked out, powerless, held back by fear, wearing a badge. But power wasn't something he ever needed to announce. It lived in the part of him he never flaunted. The part trained in blood, precision, and urgency. The part that knew the real meaning of the alarms still spiking inside. The part he'd buried to keep his daughter safe from the world he used to inhabit. He shifted his weight, preparing himself. Whether they knew it or not, whether they wanted him there or not, the moment was coming. The moment where the storm, the failing machines, and the limits of everyone else's training would force truth into the open. And when that happened, no accusation, not even hers, would matter more than the life he was determined to protect. He didn't move from the spot where Part 1 ended, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on the collapsing rhythm of the OR. Another alarm blared through the glass, sharper this time, and a nurse inside slipped on the slick floor while trying to reposition a suction. The motion jolted Meredith backward, but she still planted herself in front of the access panel, as if her authority alone could stop the crisis unfolding behind her. Daniel watched Elena's vitals dip, the heart rate line trembling, his jaw tightened. He knew exactly what that rhythm meant. He'd seen it in tents lit by generator lamps, in cramped Humvee corners, in makeshift triage stations where chaos devoured minutes whole. But right now, he wasn't standing on a battlefield. He was standing in a hospital hallway being treated like a trespasser. The young resident, Priya, glanced over her shoulder again. Her face had gone pale. She'd been trying to remain neutral, but the fear pushing through her composure wasn't subtle anymore. Something inside that room was rapidly going wrong, and they were wasting crucial time. "Ma'am," Priya said quietly, "the husband should be allowed—" "We follow safety protocol," Meredith snapped, voice pitched too high to sound confident. "If he gets near that sterile field, the liability falls on me. I won't allow it." Daniel didn't flinch at her tone. He'd heard worse, from people who had far more reason to yell. Instead, he kept his breathing even, letting every second imprint the room's condition on his mind. The angle of the surgical lights, the team's frantic gestures, the dropped tray still lying on its side. He wasn't guessing. He was diagnosing. A deeper rumble moved through the building as thunder cracked overhead. The hallway lights flickered again, longer this time, and the backup generator kicked in with a hard metallic shudder that vibrated through the walls. Daniel caught the micro-stagger in one of the portable monitors inside the OR. That half-second delay was enough to make his stomach clench. A generator swap mid-procedure wasn't just inconvenient. It stalled machines in ways most civilians never noticed. He had noticed. "Security," Meredith barked. "Keep him where he is." The guard shifted uncomfortably. Even he seemed unsure. "He's not acting out, ma'am." "That man smells like chemicals," Meredith insisted, her voice wobbling with rising panic. "He's wearing stains. Look at him." Priya's gaze dropped to the iodine marks on his uniform. She hesitated, then spoke softly. "Those aren't drug stains. That's lab iodine from blood transport routes." Meredith spun toward her. "I manage safety oversight for this entire wing. Don't contradict me." The resident's shoulders slumped. Her hesitation wasn't agreement. It was fear. Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced down. A message from Lily. "Dad, is Mom okay? Please tell me she's okay." His eyes softened for a brief moment, just long enough to remember the tiny bowl of cereal she'd eaten that morning, her swinging feet not yet reaching the kitchen floor. She was too young to understand storm warnings, too young to understand hospital protocols, but old enough to know when something felt wrong. She deserved answers. Elena deserved safety, and he deserved to stand next to her, not behind a wall of suspicion built by someone who didn't even know his name. Another alarm inside jerked Daniel's attention back. A nurse shouted for clamps. Another shouted for more suction. The blood wasn't slowing. The attending surgeon was still stuck in another wing, the storm affecting half the electronic locks. A tech rushed toward the wall panel to check equipment. Status. The machine they needed, the coagulation analyzer, was dark. Daniel inhaled slowly. He didn't need to be in the OR to know what was happening inside. He recognized the pattern of movement, the urgent head tilts, the way hands pressed along the abdomen. Field trauma, abdominal bleed, pressure failing. Without active coagulation readings, they were working blind. Priya stepped forward again, voice steadier now. "Her bleeding is worsening. We need more hands." "And infection risks skyrocket if we add unauthorized bodies," Meredith insisted. The resident's jaw tightened. "He's not unauthorized. He's her husband." Meredith stiffened. "I've already flagged the chart. It shows him as a risk. Until that's cleared, he doesn't go near that door." Daniel's eyes narrowed. Flagged. She'd tampered with the chart in real time. That wasn't fear. That was reckless control. His pulse thudded once, heavy and slow. He had spent years in situations where lives were lost because someone with rank refused to listen. He knew that pattern well, and it was unfolding again, except this time, it was his family on the table. Inside, a nurse yelled, "Pressure's falling!" The words shot through Daniel like a trigger he'd been holding back. His mind snapped instantly into the cold, sharp clarity he hadn't used in years. Every instinct aligned, every muscle readied. He didn't step forward aggressively. He didn't shout. He simply centered himself. Priya turned, eyes wide. She saw it. The quiet shift, the change in posture, the awareness no ordinary courier carried. It unsettled her enough that she broke protocol completely. "Open the door," she told security. "Now." Meredith whipped around. "Absolutely not." But at that exact moment, the OR's emergency lights dropped to half power, plunging the room into a dim red haze. The tech's voice cracked. "We've lost secondary calibration on the analyzer." Priya's voice wasn't calm anymore. It was desperate. "We need someone who knows trauma procedures." Daniel didn't move yet. He waited. He measured the room's momentum. He watched as the OR team reached their breaking point, as panic crossed the threshold where protocol mattered less than survival. And then the moment arrived. The kind of moment that turns storms into battlegrounds and strangers into lifelines. The moment when everyone finally realized they were out of time and out of options. The moment stood suspended in the dim red haze, exactly where Part 2 ended, as if the storm itself were holding its breath. The OR team had crossed their limit. Protocol had snapped. Priya's voice still echoed in the hallway. "We need someone who knows trauma procedures." And for the first time since he'd been shoved back, every pair of eyes shifted toward Daniel. He didn't step forward immediately. He let the silence settle, let the weight of the crashing monitors and frantic voices inside seep into the air. That silence mattered. It marked the shift from being treated like a risk to becoming the only person who understood what was truly happening. A nurse inside shouted again, "Pressure's dropping, rapidly." Daniel's breath tightened. The sound of her voice, strained, thin, was enough to tell him what the monitor couldn't. His gaze tracked the OR movements through the glass. One nurse clamping harder, another trying to mop blood that kept pooling faster than the suction could keep up. The surgeon was fighting blind without coagulation data, forced to guess where the bleed was worsening. He'd been here before, in different tents, under different storms, with different lives slipping away under his hands. Security hesitated, looking between Priya and Meredith, as if waiting for a single word that would save their jobs. But Priya moved closer, her voice firm. "Open the door, that's an order." Meredith snapped. "You don't have the authority." "Neither do you," Priya cut in sharply, surprising even herself. "Not to make clinical decisions, and your interference has already risked 2 lives. The hallway froze. Meredith's face flushed, her authority cracking under the combined weight of crisis and witnesses. But she still wasn't ready to let go. "You have no idea who he is," she insisted, voice trembling. "He's unstable. I flagged the chart for a reason." Daniel finally spoke, his voice steady and quiet. "My wife is bleeding out. Let me in." The way he said it, not loud, not pleading, made the guard's hand hover near the panel. Daniel didn't bark commands. He issued probabilities. His tone had gravity, skill, experience, the kind of calm that came from being forged in places where chaos was normal and hesitation was fatal. Priya stepped beside him now, recognizing what the others couldn't yet articulate. "He knows what's happening in there. Look at how he's watching the team. He's reading the room better than half the staff." Meredith opened her mouth again, but the lights flickered sharply, and a low electrical hum signaled another system struggle. The hallway monitors stuttered, momentarily dropping to static. When they returned, Elena's heart rate line had dipped dangerously low. That was the breaking point. Security swiped the panel. The OR doors released with a pneumatic hiss. Daniel didn't hesitate. He didn't rush either. He moved with purpose, each step measured, reading the scene as though stepping onto familiar terrain. Priya followed right behind him, the only one with enough presence of mind to lock the doors open in case another power flicker sealed them shut. Inside, the air was thick with urgency. Red emergency lighting cast shadows over the room, highlighting blood on the drapes, on the gloves, on the floor. 2 nurses were struggling to maintain suction. The attending surgeon was still unreachable, trapped behind storm-locked doors on another floor. The resident at the table looked overwhelmed, focused, yes, but nearing the edge of what she'd been trained for. Daniel scanned the scene in under 2 seconds. Bleeding source, lower uterine segment. Loss volume, significant, uncontrolled. Team fatigue, escalating. Equipment, analyzer offline. Clamp tray down, suction overworked. He stepped to the sink and scrubbed with a speed that didn't look rushed. It looked practiced. A nurse blinked at him, confused, but something in his posture made her instinctively hand over sterile gloves. No one questioned it. "Who are you?" the surgical resident asked, breathless. "A husband," he answered simply, gloving up, "and someone who can help you stop that bleed." Priya shot the resident a look, the kind that carried both warning and hope. The resident swallowed once and stepped aside 2 inches, enough for him to assess the wound field without crowding. Daniel leaned in, eyes narrowing slightly, hands already hovering with controlled precision. "You're losing her on the left," he murmured. "Compression angle's wrong. You're pressing above the vessel, not on it." The resident froze. "How do you—" "Here," he said, taking sterile gauze from the tray. "Shift pressure 1/2 inch down and hold steady. Don't lift, not even a millimeter." The resident obeyed. Immediately the bleeding slowed by a heartbeat. Not enough to save her, but enough to regain control. A nurse gasped softly. Daniel kept going. "Your suction isn't keeping up because you're pulling from the wrong corner. The cavity's redirecting the flow. Adjust to the lower edge." Another nurse repositioned. Blood cleared faster. Someone whispered, "He's done this before." But Daniel wasn't hearing them. His attention was pinned to Elena, to the pallor of her skin, to the labored rhythm of her heart fighting through the blood loss. Each breath she took was a countdown. While he stabilized the field, he kept track of everything: the storm rumble, the faint hum of the backup generator, the slowing but still troubling bleed. Priya stood behind him, watching his hands move with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to operate in crisis long before stepping into civilian life. Meredith appeared in the doorway, breath shaking, eyes wide with dawning horror. She could see it now, the thing she had misread entirely. Not a threat, not an addict, not a danger, a medic, a trained one. The kind who was calm, not because he was ignorant, but because he'd been here before, too many times. Daniel pressed a new angle of compression, firm and steady. "She's not out of danger," he said quietly, "but she has a chance." And for the first time since the doors opened, the OR felt like it had hope again. Hope flickered through the OR exactly where Part 3 ended, fragile as the red emergency light washing over the room. Daniel kept steady pressure on the bleeding point, his. Posture controlled, his breathing anchored, every movement a quiet display of competence the staff hadn't expected. The room had shifted around him, not with fanfare, not with recognition, but with instinctive trust. They didn't know who he was, but they sensed what he was capable of. "Her pulse is climbing," a nurse said, voice cracking with relief. "Only because he bought us time," Priya murmured, stepping in beside him. She watched his hands, the deliberate precision, the way he anticipated every shift in the blood flow before it happened. It wasn't luck, it wasn't guesswork, it was experience. Daniel assessed the pattern of the bleeding again, eyes narrowing. "Clamp set is still down, suction's barely holding, I need a clearer field." A nurse nodded and began gathering supplies, stepping over the tray that had fallen during the earlier scramble. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weird mix of adrenaline and amazement. This man, the one blocked at the door for being a supposed drug risk, was stabilizing a life with nothing more than pressure and battlefield knowledge. That irony didn't escape Priya. She glanced toward the doorway where Meredith hovered like a ghost, gripping her clipboard as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her face was drained of color, her eyes locked on Daniel, wide and horrified. She'd seen him as a threat, but now she was watching him become the linchpin of the entire operation. Daniel didn't spare her a look. He kept his focus forward. "I need someone to maintain this pressure point exactly," he said, voice low but firm. "If you shift, even slightly, we lose ground." The resident stepped in. "I can do it." He gave her a brief nod, his expression unreadable. The resident took over the compression, following his instructions without hesitation. Her hands trembled only for a second before she steadied them. Daniel moved next to the table, evaluating the broader situation. "Where's your attending?" "Locked 2 floors down by the storm shutoffs," the resident answered. "They're trying to override the system remotely." "That won't be fast enough," Daniel said. The words weren't dramatic. They were factual. He'd calculated the bleed rate, the heart rate changes, the strain on Elena's body. She didn't have the luxury of waiting. Another rumble from outside shook the building, rattling a tray on the counter. The lights dimmed, then brightened. Backup power hiccuped, throwing brief shadows across the room. The portable monitors glitched again, their data blurring before recovering. Priya hurried to the wall panel, checking system diagnostics. "Secondary calibration is still offline. Analyzer's rebooting, but we're looking at another 10 minutes at least." Daniel processed that in a heartbeat. 10 minutes. Too long. He stepped closer to the surgical field, eyes tracking the resident's compression point. "You're doing well," he said quietly. She exhaled shakily at the unexpected reassurance. Priya moved behind him, her voice softer now. "You've done this before." Daniel didn't answer. His silence said enough. But the OR staff, shaken and exhausted, needed more than competence. They needed clarity. They needed a leader. And even though he wasn't wearing a badge or a coat or a name embroidered on his chest, he stepped into that role without asking. "Listen," he said to the room, his tone cutting through the rising urgency. "We don't have normal equipment. We don't have readings. But we do have hands and focus. Keep her stable. Keep suction angled low. No sudden lifts. No unnecessary movements." The resident nodded quickly. "What about the bleed extension?" "We control what we can," he replied. "Manual pressure, minimal trauma, steady rhythm." His words steadied the team like a weight settling into place. Meanwhile, outside the OR, Meredith clung to the doorframe, chest rising and falling too fast. She stared at the scene with a kind of unraveling disbelief. Her mistake, the chart flag, the accusation, the block, was no longer theoretical. It had a heartbeat, a face, a person. 2, actually. Priya stepped toward the door in a quick stride, pulling Meredith aside. "You lied about him. You flagged the chart and stopped him from entering during a life-threatening emergency." I was protecting the staff," Meredith whispered, voice shaking. He looked unstable. "That's iodine," Priya hissed, "from blood transport routes, and you didn't check. You acted out of fear." Meredith's throat tightened. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know." "That's the problem," Priya said. "You didn't know, but you still interfered." Back inside the OR, Daniel lifted his gaze just enough to track the monitors again. Elena's numbers were shaky but holding. The resident's compression was precise now, steadier than before, guided by his instructions. "Tell me when suction starts lagging," Daniel said. A nurse answered, "Already watching." He nodded once. His calm wasn't forced. It was practiced, earned, refined through crises where panic cost lives. He didn't need anyone to understand where he came from or what he carried. He only needed them to follow his lead long enough to save Elena. Priya returned to the table, eyes still flicking toward the doorway where Meredith stood frozen. "Backup analyzer says 3 minutes," she reported. Daniel processed that. "Keep her stable. Just 3 more minutes." The room tightened its focus. Meredith slowly stepped inside the OR, almost drawn against her will. She stood behind the team, silent, watching him work. The horror in her expression wasn't just fear of consequences, it was realization. Realization she had blocked the one person capable of holding Elena's life steady during the worst moment of this storm. Daniel didn't acknowledge her. He didn't need to. Everything he needed to say was in the way his hands moved, with a precision born from years of battlefield trauma, not civilian life. The room stayed suspended in that fragile balance. Machines glitching, storm rumbling, staff fighting exhaustion, and Daniel keeping Elena tethered to life by his presence alone. When a nurse finally called out, "Analyzer rebooted," the tension in the OR shifted again, this time toward possibility. Because the window he created had been enough. The announcement, "Analyzer rebooted," hung in the air exactly where Part 4 ended, a thin beam of hope cutting through the storm-drenched chaos. But Daniel didn't allow himself relief. Not yet. Numbers could guide them again, but the body on the table still teetered on the edge, and every second mattered. He shifted his focus immediately, watching the monitor warm back to life. Its data populating slower than usual because the backup systems were fighting the building's failing grid. "Levels are stabilizing," a nurse whispered, almost afraid to believe it. "Stabilizing isn't stable," Daniel murmured, stepping closer. "We keep going. No one eases up." His voice carried the weight of experience, not authority. Yet the room obeyed with a unity born from instinct rather than hierarchy. Even the resident maintaining pressure didn't flinch or glance up. Her hands held firm, guided by the memory of how he'd positioned hers, as if she could still feel his steadiness in her muscles. Priya checked the refreshed readings, her eyes widening with cautious optimism. "Her clotting factors are low, but not dropping anymore." "That's because you've got the pressure point right," Daniel said. "Hold it." Behind him, Meredith lingered near the doorway, still clutching her clipboard like a shield. But it wasn't authority she held onto now. It was fear of what she'd caused, fear of being the reason this woman didn't make it, fear of the consequences that already whispered through her mind. But she didn't dare speak, and even if she had, no one would have listened, not now. Another rumble from outside vibrated through the walls, causing a few instruments to tremble on their trays. The storm was worsening. The hot metallic scent from the backup generator filled the air. Daniel scanned the room again, tracking each motion, each sound, each shift of breath. Everything he'd been trained to read under worse lighting, worse temperatures, worse odds. He leaned closer to the surgical field. "We need to anticipate the bleed pocket extension. If it ruptures again, we lose the window we gained," the resident finished for him, her voice calmer than before. Daniel nodded. "Exactly." Priya stepped forward, glancing between the surgeon's position guide and the still glitching monitor. "We need to see if the backup data is accurate. Give it another minute." "We don't have another minute," Daniel said quietly. His tone made her throat tighten. He wasn't guessing. He was translating the rhythm of chaos into certainty. He looked toward a nurse. "I need fresh gauze and the secondary clamp." "The clamp tray fell," she said apologetically. "I can sterilize another in 30 seconds. 30 seconds is too long," Daniel replied. "Gauze first." She moved instantly, handing him what he needed. Daniel stepped in closer to the resident. "Shift your pressure, just a hair lower." She adjusted. The bleeding lessened even more. A few heartbeats later, the analyzer beeped softly, signaling it was fully calibrated. The resident exhaled shakily. "We finally have data." Priya scanned the numbers again, her energy shifting from panic to strategy. Okay. These levels are livable. If we maintain this, we can anchor the repair once the attending arrives." Daniel kept his gaze on Elena. Her skin was still pale, her breathing shallow, but the downward spiral had eased. That mattered. That meant the war wasn't lost. The storm growled again, sending a ripple across the OR lights, but they didn't flicker this time. A small mercy. Priya stepped beside Daniel, lowering her voice. "You didn't hesitate for a second. You walked in like you knew every inch of this procedure." His eyes stayed on Elena. "I know what it looks like when time runs out." The answer wasn't loud, but it hit her with a clarity she couldn't ignore. In that moment, Priya understood. He wasn't reacting to chaos. He was operating inside it, comfortable in a space where others withered under pressure. Behind them, Meredith finally took a timid step forward. Her voice trembled. I didn't know she was in this condition. I thought—" Daniel didn't turn. "You didn't think at all." The room froze. His words weren't angry. They weren't loud. They were a truth shaped by the danger she had created. Priya's jaw tightened. "You blocked him from reaching his wife because of a stain on his uniform. It looked—" Meredith's voice broke. "I was trying to protect the staff." "From what?" Priya snapped quietly. The one person who recognized the danger before any of us did, the only one who stayed calm when everything fell apart. Meredith's breath hitched, but she had no defense left. Daniel didn't look away from Elena. "Reacting out of fear is one thing," he said softly. "Interfering with a life-or-death emergency is another." His tone wasn't cruel, it was factual, and facts had weight. Another alert chimed from the hallway. A staff member rushed in. "They're overriding the lockdown. Attending surgeon is 5 minutes out." The OR buzzed with renewed purpose. Good, Daniel said. We can hold her stable until then. Keep suction low. Keep rhythm tight. Priya gave orders now with confidence, mirroring Daniel's cadence. The room flowed with synchronized precision, a team shaped, temporarily, by the steady presence of a man they had underestimated. Meredith stepped backward, her breath shallow. She stared at the floor, at Elena, at Daniel, at the consequences pulling tighter around her. Her own fear had created a gap that nearly cost everything, and now she couldn't look away from what that meant. As the attending surgeon finally rushed in, mask already on, Daniel stepped aside, not fully, but just enough to give the surgeon space while maintaining the pressure point guidance he'd established. The surgeon froze for half a second. Who? Priya cut in quickly. He stabilized her. We wouldn't have gotten this far without him. The surgeon didn't question it. Then stay right there. Don't move. Daniel nodded once, hands steady. The crisis hadn't passed, but they had a fighting chance now because he'd forced his way into the moment the storm tried to take from him. And the victory strategy, crisis resolution, had begun to unfold exactly as it needed to. The attending surgeon stepped to the table exactly where Part 5 ended, eyes sharp behind the mask as he absorbed the chaotic scene. He didn't waste a second assessing who Daniel was. The truth lived in the stabilized field, the slowed bleeding, the resident's confident pressure placement, the renewed order in the room. Authority recognized effectiveness. Nothing more needed to be said. Maintain that angle, the surgeon instructed, nodding at Daniel's positioning. Don't shift unless I tell you. Daniel gave a short nod. His hands remained steady, anchored by years of training that had never fully left him, even after he traded battlefields for quiet hospital corridors. Elena's condition still hung in a precarious balance. One wrong movement, one slip in pressure, one sudden rupture, and the window they had fought for would vanish. The surgeon began working through the exposed field, using the freshly rebooted analyzer readings to guide his next steps. Priya hovered nearby, ready to supply clamps, suction adjustments, anything needed to keep the repair moving. Bleed extension is deeper than expected, the surgeon muttered. We need to secure the lateral tear. Daniel didn't look up. Your angle is wide by about 2 degrees. Narrow it to minimize trauma. The surgeon paused, not offended, not skeptical, just recalibrating. He adjusted his hand slightly. The bleeding slowed further. That's better, Daniel said quietly. The surgeon didn't question him. Keep calling out what you see. Around them, the OR staff exchanged looks. The transformation of the room was unmistakable. Panic had turned into coordinated action. The chaos Meredith's interference caused had been replaced by guidance from a man she'd tried to keep out. Another rumble of thunder rolled overhead, shaking the ceiling tiles. A faint flicker raced through the emergency lights, but they held. The building trembled, but the OR stood firm, bound not by perfect equipment, but by the controlled precision of the hands working inside it. Priya checked the monitor. Heart rate is stabilizing again. BP is still low, but rising. Good, Daniel murmured. That means we're winning back minutes. Minutes mattered more than anything. A nurse near the doorway whispered to another, Who is he? The other shook her head. Not a courier, not with hands like that. But Daniel stayed silent. He wasn't here to explain himself. He was here to keep Elena alive. The surgeon leaned in deeper, suction clearing the field as he pinpointed the rupture. Found it, he said, securing clamp now. The clamp clicked into place with a metallic finality that rippled through the room. The bleeding slowed almost instantly, and several people exhaled at the same time. Daniel shifted his pressure angle slightly. Hold that clamp steady. She's still fragile. The resident's voice shook with relief. Her vitals are responding. Priya wiped her forehead with her sleeve. We're not out of danger yet, but we're close. Outside the OR, Meredith remained rooted in place, her clipboard pressed to her chest. Her breath hitched every few seconds as she watched the man she'd accused of drug use hold the surgical field, together with the confidence of someone born to operate under pressure. She whispered to herself, What have I done? Priya heard her and turned. You flagged the chart without checking. You tampered with a medical file during a crisis. I panicked, Meredith said. He looked like someone who works, Priya snapped. People who work don't smell like designer sanitizer and polished conference tables. Meredith flinched. She stepped back, her face collapsing inward. Is she going to make it? Priya didn't answer. She returned to the table. Meredith stood alone. Inside, the surgeon continued the repair with renewed confidence. Another clamp, he said. We're stabilizing well. Daniel stayed completely focused, watching for the micro changes that signaled danger. He recognized the subtle shift in Elena's breathing pattern and adjusted his stance. Her respiratory rhythm's uneven. She might spike another drop. The anesthesiologist nodded. I see it. Adjusting now? Seconds stretched. The only sounds were suction, steady commands, and the distant storm. Then, finally, the surgeon leaned back slightly. Tear is secured. We're closing. Priya nearly sagged with relief. The resident's shoulders slumped, but her hands stayed firm. Daniel remained poised, ready for any setback. Only when the surgeon nodded at him did he slowly ease pressure. The bleeding did not return. A nurse let out a shaky laugh. She's holding. She's really holding. Priya's eyes brimmed with tears. She tried to blink away. We saved her, she whispered. Daniel didn't feel the relief fully, not yet. His gaze remained on Elena, watching for any subtle sign of regression. But when her heart rate steadied into a slow, consistent rhythm, something inside him finally loosened. The surgeon stepped back. Whoever you are, thank you. He's her husband, Priya said quietly. The surgeon blinked. Then she married the right man? Only then did Daniel step away from the table, his gloves streaked with dried blood, his heartbeat finally slowing. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the release of a pressure he'd carried every second since the doors were opened for him. He turned toward the doorway. Meredith was still there. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The damage she'd caused was written across her features, the lie she'd inserted, the interference she'd imposed, the danger she'd created. Daniel didn't speak to her. He simply walked past her, toward the sink, toward the edge of the room, toward the next phase of the night. He wasn't finished. The crisis had only just stepped into its second stage, the part where truth began to surface, where accountability took shape, and where the full weight of what Meredith had done would finally collide with reality. And the victory strategy, crisis resolution, moved closer to its turning point. Daniel stepped away from the sink exactly where part 6 ended, water streaming down his wrists, gloves peeled off and discarded in the hazardous bin. The OR behind him hummed with a different kind of energy now, calmer, steadier, no longer teetering on crisis, but slowly shifting into recovery. Elena was stabilized, the bleeding was controlled, the attending surgeon was closing with confident, measured movements. The team had rallied, but the night wasn't done, not for Daniel, and definitely not for Meredith. He wiped his hands on a sterile towel, grounding himself before turning back toward the wide doorway where she still stood, pale and rigid, as if she'd turned to stone. The clipboard she'd clutched all night now hung limply at her side. Her eyes darted between the surgical field and Daniel, but she didn't speak. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she finally understood. Priya moved to Daniel's side, lowering her voice. She's stable. You gave us the window. Without you? She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Daniel nodded once. Thank you for opening the door. Priya swallowed hard. I only did what was right, but you... Her gaze drifted to the OR table, to the woman whose life Daniel had anchored with his hands alone. You did what most couldn't. The attending surgeon, still closing the final sutures, added without looking up. And you did it under failing equipment and half a power grid. He paused. Field experience? Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was answer enough. Priya gently placed a hand on his arm. You can stay until we move her to recovery. She's going to want you there when she wakes up. He nodded again, a quiet acknowledgement, but he didn't step closer to the table yet. He couldn't. Not until he dealt with the weight still hanging in the doorway. He walked toward Meredith. She stiffened, gripping her clipboard as though it could shield her from what she'd done. Her breath hitched when he stopped in front of her, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough that she had nowhere to hide from the truth. Her voice trembled. I didn't know. I didn't understand. I thought you were... Daniel cut her off with a quiet firmness. A threat? She swallowed, unable to answer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't display anger. The calm in his tone was worse than shouting. It stripped away any excuse she might have tried to lean on. "You looked at my uniform," he said, "and decided what I was. You didn't check my name. You didn't check my wife's file. You didn't ask a single question." "I was trying to protect the wing from contamination," she whispered. Daniel's eyes stayed steady. "You were protecting yourself from a lawsuit, not patients." Her face crumpled slightly. The words hit harder because he wasn't trying to wound her. He was stating facts, facts that echoed too loudly in the quiet hallway. Behind them, a nurse murmured, "We're transferring her to recovery soon," as she began cleaning instruments. Priya rejoined them, her expression composed but firm. "I've documented everything from the moment you flagged the chart." Meredith's head jerked. "You documented?" "Yes," Priya said sharply. "Because your interference nearly cost a mother and her child their lives." Meredith staggered back as if the words had physical force. "I didn't mean—" Daniel spoke again softly. "Meaning doesn't erase impact." He took a breath, grounding himself before emotion could slip through. "My daughter is waiting at home for her mother. She trusts this hospital to keep her safe. And today, you almost broke that trust." Meredith's eyes filled with tears, but Daniel didn't relent. This wasn't cruelty. It was accountability. Just then, the attending surgeon called out, "We're done. Prep for transfer." The team sprang back into motion. Monitors adjusted, clamps removed, sterile drapes pulled aside, warm blankets prepared. The OR felt alive again, no longer suffocating under crisis. Daniel turned from Meredith without waiting for her response. He had nothing left to say. She had everything to answer for. He stepped beside the table as they prepared to move Elena. Seeing her now, pale, exhausted but alive, nearly knocked the air from his lungs. Her chest rose steadily under the warm blanket. A soft beeping kept time at her side. The child they'd come here to meet rested in a separate bassinet, breathing on its own, tiny body wrapped in hospital cotton. Priya gave Daniel a tiny nod. "She's stable enough for recovery care. You can walk with her." He exhaled a breath he'd been holding since the moment he heard the first emergency call. As the gurney rolled forward, Daniel followed right alongside, his hand resting near hers, even though she was still unconscious. Every step felt heavier than the last, not from fear, but from the delayed release of everything he'd held inside. Focus had kept him level, training had kept him steady. But now, walking beside her, the emotional weight began to settle in his chest. Priya walked on the opposite side of the gurney, glancing at him. "I still don't know who you are," she said softly. "I'm her husband," he said again. Priya shook her head. "No, that's not all." Daniel didn't answer. They wheeled Elena into the recovery wing, away from the OR's red glow and into softer, calmer lighting. Nurses hurried ahead to prepare fluids and continue monitoring. Daniel stepped back as staff positioned her, giving them room to work. He stood at the foot of the bed, hands at his sides, letting the reality sink in. She was alive. Their child was alive. And the truth about what happened tonight wasn't going to stay hidden, not from administrators, not from staff, and not from the people whose lives were changed by a single chart flag. As he watched the recovery room settle into its quiet rhythm, Daniel knew something with absolute certainty. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The recovery room hummed softly exactly where Part 7 ended, the quiet rhythm a stark contrast to the storm-soaked chaos they had just come from. Daniel stood at the foot of the bed, watching Elena breathe evenly beneath the warm blanket. The monitors glowed steady green beside her, the room lit in gentle whites and blues instead of the harsh red emergency lights of the OR. For the first time all night, the danger wasn't clawing at the edges of her survival. But the night's damage wasn't confined to one operating room. What Meredith had done wasn't washed away just because Elena lived. The consequences had begun gathering like storm clouds of their own, and Daniel knew it. Anyone watching the shift in staff behavior could feel it too. Nurses whispering, techs glancing toward the corridor, where administrators moved with tense urgency, Priya typing rapidly into a tablet with a clenched jaw. This wasn't going to be contained. Interference this severe never stayed quiet. Priya approached Daniel slowly. "She's stable," she said softly. "The next few hours we'll be monitoring for post-op bleeding, but she's doing well." Daniel nodded once. Thank you. All of you. Priya shook her head. You kept her alive. We were losing her, and you walked in like you'd done it 1,000 times. He didn't respond. He wasn't interested in being praised. His gaze stayed on Elena's face, the faint color returning to her cheeks, the slower rise and fall of her chest. Relief pulsed through him, but the night's weight hadn't fully lifted. A knock sounded at the doorway. 2 hospital administrators stepped inside, one with a badge reading Incident Review Lead, the other a compliance officer. Their expressions were serious, guarded, the kind that signaled forms, statements, investigations. And they weren't here for the medical outcome. They were here because of what led to it. Mr. Rourke? The lead administrator asked. Daniel turned. Yes. We need to speak with you privately about the events leading up to your entry into the OR. Priya stepped forward immediately. He stays here. His wife just came out of emergency surgery. You can speak in this room or not at all. The administrators exchanged a glance, then nodded. Here is fine. Daniel didn't move from Elena's side. The administrator opened a tablet. We've received multiple staff reports that you were prevented from entering the maternity wing during your wife's medical emergency. Daniel confirmed with a quiet, yes. The compliance officer added, we also have reports that the chart was flagged with an unverified visitor alert identifying you as a potential drug risk. Can you confirm if anyone confronted you with that accusation? Daniel's jaw clenched once. Yes, Meredith Vale. The administrator typed, and she prevented your access to the OR. Yes. Priya's voice sharpened, and she did it without verifying his identity or consulting the attending surgeon. The compliance officer nodded slowly. We've already reviewed the digital access logs. Her account placed the flag at the exact moment you attempted to enter. That action locked the visitor system for approximately 7 minutes. 7 minutes. In an emergency bleed like Elena's, 7 minutes was a lethal eternity. The administrator continued. We'll need a full statement from you after your wife stabilizes further. For now, we want to confirm whether you attempted to force entry, acted aggressively, or threatened staff in any way. Daniel shook his head. No. Priya cut in again. He didn't. He stayed calm even while she was crashing inside. The administrator nodded, documenting everything. We'll conduct interviews with all associated staff. This will trigger a compliance investigation and likely a state-level review. Meredith's career wasn't cracking. It was shattering. The administrators stepped out, leaving the room heavier than before. Priya exhaled shakily. This is going to escalate fast. Daniel looked at Elena again. Her hand twitched slightly, a sign she was coming out of anesthesia. He gently rested his fingers near hers, not touching yet, but ready. Priya lowered her voice. You know, they're going to ask who you really are. He didn't look at her. I'm her husband. You're also something else, she whispered. No civilian reads a surgical field like that. No courier knows trauma angles or pressure rhythms. No one walks into chaos with that kind of control unless they've lived their life inside it. He stayed silent. Priya softened. I'm not accusing you. I'm thanking you. A faint cry sounded from the next bassinet. Their child, stirring from post-delivery checks. A nurse gently rocked the tiny bundle. He's strong, she said with a warm smile. Very strong. Daniel's throat tightened in a way battlefields had never managed to do. He moved closer, hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from awe. The child settled when the nurse tilted him so Daniel could see his face, his son. A new pulse of purpose filled him. Quiet, unshakable, the kind that made everything else smaller for a moment. But the door opened again. This time, it wasn't administrators. It was Meredith. Her shoulders hunched, her eyes were swollen, her clipboard was gone. Without it, her posture collapsed entirely, as if her authority dissolved along with the rigid grip she once kept on protocol. Can I speak to you? She whispered. Priya moved protectively closer. You need to leave. He doesn't owe you anything. No, Meredith said quietly. He doesn't. But I need to say this anyway. Daniel didn't turn away. Say what you need to. Her voice cracked. I'm sorry. I misjudged you. I panicked. I saw the stains and... Her breath caught. I didn't think, and I nearly... She couldn't finish the sentence. That doesn't undo what happened, Daniel said softly. I know, she whispered, tears spilling. But I'll cooperate with the investigation. I'll admit what I did. Priya stepped forward. You don't get points for confessing when the whole hallway saw you. Meredith swallowed. I know. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't condemn her further. Focus on the truth. That's the only thing that matters now. Meredith nodded shakily and turned to leave, disappearing down the hall. The nurse brought Daniel's newborn closer, the tiny breaths rhythmic and soft. Priya whispered, You saved both of them. Daniel finally reached out, touching his son's tiny hand. We're not done yet, he murmured. The review, the truth, the consequences. All of it was coming, and the victory strategy, crisis resolution, moved into its next phase, accountability. Daniel held his son's tiny hand exactly where Part 8 ended, feeling the fragile strength in those barely curled fingers. The recovery room settled into a quieter rhythm around him, machines humming, nurses moving softly, Elena resting peacefully as the anesthesia wore off. But peace was just the surface. Beneath it, the night's consequences were gathering speed, ready to unfold in ways no one could slow. Priya checked Elena's vitals one more time, then stepped back. She's responding well, she whispered. The next few hours are just monitoring. She hesitated before adding, You can sit with her. She'll feel you near, even if she isn't awake yet. Daniel nodded. He wanted to sit, needed to sit. But the administrator's questions still lingered in his mind, and the weight of what had happened, what almost happened, pressed against his chest like an unspoken threat. He wasn't a man who lingered in the aftermath. He'd seen too many crises to think the end of one meant safety. As he eased into the chair beside Elena's bed, the door cracked open again. A nurse peeked in. Mr. Rourke, the hospital risk manager needs a quick word. They said it's urgent, but it'll only take a minute. Priya stiffened. He stays here. His wife just came out of surgery. The nurse lifted a folder. They said this couldn't wait. It's about the chart. Daniel glanced at Elena, then at his newborn sleeping in the bassinet. He rose slowly. I'll be right back. Priya followed him into the hallway. The risk manager waited near the nurse's station, a woman with sharp eyes, a straight spine, and a tablet already open. Mr. Rourke, she said with a clipped tone, we're escalating this to a Level 3 incident review. Priya's eyebrows shot up. Level 3? I know what it is, the manager said. A Level 3 means probable legal action and mandatory state reporting. The severity of the interference meets criteria. Daniel didn't blink. What do you need from me? She tapped the tablet. We need your full account of what happened from the moment you attempted to access the maternity wing to the moment you entered the OR. Priya stepped between them. Not now, later. He just saved his wife's life. And that is precisely why we need his statement, the manager countered. His experience and the timeline will determine liability. Daniel remained calm. Let's do it. Priya gave him a frustrated look. You don't have to do this now. But the truth was, he did. He'd spent years in situations where timing decided everything. Delay only hid problems. Delay only made the aftermath worse. I'm fine, Daniel said quietly. Stay with them. Priya nodded reluctantly and returned to the recovery room. The risk manager led Daniel into a consultation room. First question, she began. Did you at any point exhibit signs of intoxication or impairment? Daniel stared at her. No. Did you raise your voice or behave in a threatening manner? No. Did you attempt to force entry into the OR? No. She typed rapidly. Multiple witnesses confirmed that. Now, explain your interpretation of why Ms. Vale flagged the chart. Daniel inhaled slowly. She saw iodine stains on my uniform and assumed they were drug residue. And did she ask for clarification? No. Verify your identity? No. Consult the attending? No. The manager's typing halted, her jaw clenched. Tampering with a chart during an active medical emergency is a direct violation of state and federal law. Her action triggered a hard lock system delay of 7 minutes. That delay nearly contributed to a catastrophic outcome. Daniel gave a single, quiet nod. Yes. What is your background? she asked, eyes narrowing slightly. Witness statements indicate you demonstrated advanced trauma management skills. Are you a medical professional? Daniel paused. His past wasn't something he talked about, not because he was hiding, but because he'd chosen a different life for his daughter's sake. Former Army combat medic, he said simply. The manager's expression shifted, not surprised, but unsettled. That explains everything? It explains nothing, Daniel corrected softly. What matters is that I wasn't allowed inside to help her. The manager exhaled. We'll be making a formal report. Ms. Vale will face administrative hearings, likely legal charges. Is she still in the building? Daniel asked. Yes, she's meeting with compliance. Daniel didn't respond. A part of him didn't want to see her again. Another part, calmer, older, knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. When he returned to the recovery room, Elena's eyes were fluttering open. He reached her side instantly. Hey, he whispered, leaning closer. Her voice was weak. They said, you helped. What happened? You're okay, he murmured. That's what matters. Elena blinked slowly. Our baby? He gestured to the bassinet. Perfect, strong. A tear slid down her cheek, and he caught it with his thumb. She squeezed his hand with what little strength she had. Priya entered quietly. She woke up? She did, Daniel said. Priya smiled gently. Good, she's stable. And your son, he's doing beautifully. Elena's gaze drifted to Priya. Thank you. Priya shook her head. Your husband is the one who held things together. Daniel felt Elena's fingers tighten around his. She looked at him with a tenderness that nearly broke him. Gratitude, fear, love, all tangled together. But the moment was interrupted when another administrator approached the door with a cautious knock. Mr. Rourke, we need you again. Compliance wants your presence for confirmation on their findings. Priya frowned. They're rushing this? They have no choice, the administrator said. Daniel kissed Elena's forehead. I'll be right back. As he followed the administrator down the hall, he sensed the shift in the building. Staff watched him with quiet respect now, whispers of what he'd done circulating through departments faster than the storm winds. He stepped into the conference room where compliance waited, and there, sitting at the table, mascara streaked and hands trembling, was Meredith. This was where truth would collide with consequence, where crisis resolution began its final turn. Daniel stepped into the conference room exactly where Part 9 ended, closing the door quietly behind him. The space smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper, sterile, clinical, a stark contrast to the storm-torn night he'd just survived. Meredith sat at the center of the long table, shoulders slumped, mascara streaked, fingers twisted together in a desperate knot. She looked nothing like the authoritative woman who had blocked the OR doors hours earlier. Now she looked small, cornered, and terrified. Across from her sat the compliance officer, the risk manager, and the incident review lead. Their expressions were composed but heavy, the tight professionalism of people preparing to discuss something serious enough to alter careers and lives. Mr. Rourke, the review lead said, gesturing to the chair beside her, thank you for coming. We're finalizing the preliminary timeline. Daniel remained standing for a moment, scanning the room. Meredith couldn't meet his gaze. Her eyes darted to the floor, the table, her trembling hands. Anywhere but him. The risk manager tapped her tablet. We need verbal confirmation on a few final details before this is escalated beyond the hospital. He nodded silently. Meredith flinched at the phrasing. Beyond the hospital. She understood exactly what that meant. The compliance officer cleared his throat. Mr. Rourke, we've already spoken to every staff member present tonight. Their accounts are consistent with your written statement. We need to verify one point. When Ms. Vale flagged your wife's chart, did she provide any explanation, or did she refuse to engage? Daniel answered, steady and quiet. She refused to listen. She didn't verify anything. She saw stains on my uniform and created the narrative she wanted. Meredith squeezed her eyes shut. The lead administrator tapped a line on the digital report. We have footage of the hallway and the moment security intervened. You remained non-aggressive. There was no attempt to force entry. Your hands were visible at all times. Is there anything in that footage you would like to clarify? No. The risk manager clicked to the next screen. We also reviewed badge logs. Ms. Vale accessed the patient chart twice in a 2-minute window. The second access triggered an unverified visitor alert. That alert locked the maternity wing visitor protocol system. The compliance officer finished quietly. That delay lasted 7 minutes, 39 seconds. Meredith let out a tiny, strangled sound, a barely audible gasp swallowed by the room's silence. 7 minutes and 39 seconds. Enough to kill a mother and her child. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't need to. The numbers spoke for him. The review lead took a slow breath. Ms. Vale, do you have anything you wish to add before we finalize this report? Meredith finally lifted her eyes, red-rimmed and shimmering. I'm not going to defend myself, her voice cracked. Daniel felt no triumph in that. No satisfaction, just the heaviness of truth settling exactly where it belonged. I panicked, she whispered. I let fear control me. I saw him in that uniform and thought... Her voice broke again. I thought he didn't belong there. I thought I was stopping a risk. But I became the risk. The room remained still. The incident lead folded her hands. Your admission will be noted, but it doesn't erase the outcome or the violation. You interfered in active medical care and altered a patient record without authorization. The compliance officer added, state law classifies this as felony interference with medical operations. Daniel could see the words hit Meredith like blows. Her shoulders caved inward. The risk manager pressed on. Given the severity, the board will suspend you immediately pending formal review. We will also be forwarding our findings to the district attorney's office by morning. Meredith's breath hitched as she whispered, I deserve it. The room didn't correct her. Daniel watched her closely. He wasn't here to punish her. He wasn't here to demand anything. He was here because the truth needed to be spoken aloud in front of witnesses who couldn't look away or pretend ignorance. The lead admin turned back to Daniel. Before we close, we need one final confirmation. Do you wish to issue any statement for the report regarding your wife's condition? Daniel exhaled. She's alive because your staff stepped aside when they did. But the delay nearly cost her everything. The risk manager nodded solemnly. We understand, Daniel added quieter. And for the record, I wasn't a threat. I'm an Army combat medic. I know what I'm doing in a crisis. A ripple of understanding moved through the administrators. His calm, his precision, his refusal to panic. All of it made sense now. It explains your actions, the compliance officer said. Daniel looked at him, eyes steady. It explains why I had to get to her, and why what happened tonight can't happen to anyone else. No one argued. The review lead stood. That concludes tonight's session. You'll be contacted for further statements during the legal proceedings. For now, please return to your family. Daniel didn't look at Meredith again. He didn't need to. Her fate was already set, not by him, but by her actions. He stepped out of the room and into the quieter hallway. The storm outside had finally begun to ease, though thunder still grumbled softly, distant now instead of threatening. Nurses walked past with tired smiles. A janitor mopped near the elevator, humming as if the hospital hadn't nearly lost 2 lives hours earlier. Daniel walked slowly back toward recovery. With each step, the weight on his shoulders loosened, not because the night was over, but because the truth had finally begun its path toward justice. When he pushed open the recovery room door, Elena stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Their son slept peacefully beside her. Daniel stepped into the room and felt something warm settle in his chest. The crisis was ending, but the final phase of justice was just about to begin. Daniel stepped quietly into the recovery room, exactly where Part 10 ended, the soft click of the door barely audible beneath the steady hum of machines. Elena stirred, her eyelids fluttering open as if her body sensed his presence before her mind did. When her gaze found him, a faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Fragile, exhausted, but undeniably alive. You came back, she whispered, her voice thin. I never left, Daniel murmured, taking her hand gently. Her fingers curled weakly around his. Their son slept peacefully beside her, wrapped tightly, chest rising in soft, steady motions. A nurse adjusted the blanket, smiling. "He's doing beautifully." Elena's eyes shimmered. What happened?" Daniel squeezed her hand. "You made it through the surgery. It got rough, but you're safe now." He didn't tell her how close she came to being lost. Not yet. The truth would come in pieces when she was stronger. A knock sounded at the doorway, and the attending surgeon stepped in. His face softened the moment he saw Daniel. "I wanted to check in on both of you," he said. "Your wife's holding steady. The next 24 hours are important, but her vitals are strong." Elena managed a faint, "Thank you." The surgeon shook his head. "You should thank your husband. He didn't just help. He kept the situation from collapsing while we were locked out." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. After a few more checks, the surgeon excused himself, leaving the small family in a pocket of quiet warmth. Elena's grip tightened again. Why were you in the OR?" Daniel sat down, his voice low. "There was a problem with the machines. They needed help." Her eyes drifted over his face, reading the lines of fatigue, the shadows beneath his calm expression. "There's more you're not saying." "There is," he admitted softly. "But you're here. Our son is here. That's what matters tonight." Elena nodded slowly, accepting that answer for now. A few minutes later, Priya slipped in with a tablet. "Sorry to interrupt, but I need signatures for post-op documentation." She handed the forms to Daniel, then gave Elena a warm smile. "You scared us earlier, but you're doing great." Elena whispered, "Thank you. For everything." Priya hesitated, then leaned in closer. "Your husband saved you. Truly." Her voice dropped. "When the machines failed and the storm cut power, he stepped in without hesitation. You should have seen him." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Priya?" "No," she insisted softly. "She deserves to know." Elena looked at him again, her eyes filling. You helped with the surgery?" He nodded once. "I couldn't do nothing." Priya exhaled. "He did more than help. He stabilized you long enough for us to finish the procedure." Tears slipped down Elena's cheeks. Daniel brushed them away gently. "It's all right. You're safe." Priya touched Daniel's arm. "The administrators are moving quickly. They're filing the preliminary report within the hour. They're not letting this slide." Daniel nodded quietly. Before Priya could leave, another figure appeared behind her, the compliance officer. His expression was tense but determined. "Mr. Rourke, the district attorney's office has been contacted. They want statements first thing in the morning." Elena gasped softly. "Statements? Why?" Priya answered first. "Because what happened wasn't just a mistake. It was interference." The compliance officer nodded. "Your wife's chart was deliberately altered by Ms. Vale. That triggered the lockdown protocol that prevented you from entering. The DA is considering felony interference with medical operations." Elena's face tightened with confusion and fear. Why would she do that?" Daniel's voice was steady. "She panicked. She thought I was a threat." "But you weren't," Elena began. "I know," Daniel said softly. The compliance officer added, "Her actions caused a delay during an active hemorrhage. Legally, that's severe, and given your background..." Elena looked startled. "Background?" Daniel finally met her eyes. "I used to be an Army combat medic before I started working nights here." For a moment, Elena stared, stunned, not because she hadn't known he served, but because she had never seen that part of him surface so sharply, so clearly, so decisively. "I should have realized," she whispered. "You were so calm, even when I was terrified." Daniel gave her a faint smile. Someone had to be steady. The compliance officer cleared his throat politely. "We'll return later. For now, you both should rest." As the door closed again, silence settled over the room. Elena reached up, tracing his cheek with trembling fingers. "You saved me." He leaned into her touch. "We saved you. All of us." "No," she whispered. "You did." Daniel glanced at their newborn, then back at her. "I only did what anyone would do." Her voice cracked. "Not everyone could." He didn't argue. A nurse entered to check her vitals, giving Daniel a sympathetic smile as she worked. "She's recovering beautifully. We'll keep monitoring." When she left, Daniel sank into the chair beside the bed. exhaustion finally beginning to seep into his muscles. Elena reached for his hand again. He held it gently. "What happens now?" she asked. Daniel exhaled. "There'll be hearings, an investigation, maybe more." She closed her eyes. "Will she be punished?" He brushed his thumb along her hand. "She already feels the weight of what she did, but yes, there will be consequences." A quiet pause stretched between them. Then Elena whispered, "Stay with me?" Daniel kissed her forehead. "I'm not going anywhere." The dim light washed over them. The man who fought to save his family, the woman he refused to lose, the child who represented their future. Justice hadn't arrived yet, but it was on its way. Daniel stayed in the chair beside Elena's bed, exactly where Part 11 ended, her hand curled weakly inside his, their newborn sleeping in the bassinet nearby. The recovery room lights were dimmed now, casting a warm glow over the three of them, an island of calm after a night carved out of fear, blood, and instinct. Elena's breathing had steadied into a soft rhythm, her body finally relaxing for the first time since surgery. Daniel didn't move, barely blinked, afraid that stepping away would unravel the safety they had fought so hard to reclaim. A soft knock came at the door. Priya stepped inside, a clipboard tucked against her chest. Her expression was gentle but weighted, the kind reserved for moments when truth had to be delivered carefully. "Sorry to disturb," she whispered. "The district attorney's office just arrived. They're interviewing staff tonight." Daniel nodded. It was only a matter of time. Elena looked at him with tired confusion. "They're here already? Right now?" Priya stepped closer. "Interference during an active medical emergency triggers automatic escalation, and the evidence is overwhelming. They want to begin with the staff, but they'll need your husband's final statement in the morning." Elena swallowed hard. What will happen to her?" Priya's jaw tightened. "That's up to the DA now." She hesitated before adding, "And the charges they're considering are severe." Daniel didn't flinch. He'd expected this from the moment the administrators first approached him. Elena slowly sank back into her pillow, processing the weight of everything she hadn't seen behind the OR doors. Priya glanced between them, softened her tone, and reached out to squeeze Elena's hand gently. "Rest. You're safe. Both of you." Then she gave Daniel a quiet nod before leaving the room. For a long moment, neither spoke. Elena broke the silence first, her voice barely above a murmur. "I can't believe someone would keep you from me. During something like that." Daniel lowered his gaze. "Fear makes people do reckless things, but fear doesn't excuse choices." Elena's eyes glistened. "You saved me, and our son. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he whispered. "You just have to get better." She squeezed his fingers. "I'm scared about the hearings, the investigation, all of it." He leaned closer. "You don't need to worry. I'll handle whatever comes." Nurse entered to check her vitals again, smiling when she saw Elena awake and alert. "You're doing well," she said warmly. "Your numbers look good. If this continues, we'll be moving you out of critical recovery soon." Elena exhaled with relief. The nurse left, leaving them alone again. Daniel looked at their son in the bassinet. Small, helpless, new. "We came close," he whispered. Elena nodded, tears trailing down her cheeks. "Too close." His hand moved to brush the tears away. "But we're here, all three of us." Before she could respond, footsteps approached again, firmer this time, purposeful. The compliance officer opened the door slightly. "Mr. Rourke," he said softly. "The DA's team just finished speaking with Ms. Vale." Elena tensed. "What did she say?" Daniel asked. "She admitted everything," he replied. "The false accusation, the chart tampering, the interference." He paused. "She also said, 'You saved her too.'" Daniel frowned. "Her?" The officer nodded. "Her words were, 'He saved everyone, even me.'" Elena looked bewildered. "Why would she say that?" The officer sighed. "Sometimes realizing the full impact of your actions brings clarity. She understands now that she crossed a line she can't undo." "What happens next?" Daniel asked. "We'll finalize the official report tonight. The DA will file preliminary charges in the morning. Felony interference, reckless endangerment, potentially more, depending on how the review board rules. Elena closed her eyes, overwhelmed. The officer softened. I know this is a lot, but the system is moving because what happened to you both shouldn't happen to anyone. He stepped back. Rest. We'll only disturb you again if absolutely necessary. After he left, the room felt heavier, but safer, like truth had finally claimed its space. Elena whispered, "Are you okay?" Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension of the night finally loosening in his shoulders. "I will be." She studied him, the steadiness in his eyes, the quiet strength he carried without ever boasting, the calm that had guided a room full of professionals through a storm and a failing OR. "For years," she said softly, "I wondered why you walked away from the military. Tonight I finally understand. You didn't lose your skills, you just chose where to use them." Daniel reached for her hand again. "I chose this family." Their son stirred, letting out a tiny cry. Daniel lifted him gently, holding the swaddled bundle to his chest. Elena's eyes softened at the sight. "He looks like you," she whispered. "He looks like hope," Daniel murmured. He placed the baby in her arms, guiding her hands until she held him securely. Elena's breath hitched as she felt their son warm and alive against her. Tears slid down her cheeks again. "Thank you for not giving up." "I never will," he said. Outside the window, the storm had finally broken. The sky was lighter now, the clouds thinning as dawn approached. The hospital felt different, quieter, steadier, like a place that had survived something it wouldn't forget. Elena closed her eyes, resting her cheek against their baby's head. Daniel stayed beside her, his hand resting where hers held their son. They had survived, together, and justice was already on its way. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. HOA. Karen slipped an abortion pill into my pregnant wife's drink. Judge put her in jail for 15 years. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?